What's up guys, we got some new IEMs and a lot of headphones from Kiwiears today. They sent me their entire lineup, so shout out to them. And I'm gonna be speed running and just ranking them to see if they are worth the hype or not. Starting with their newest planar, the Aether, these follow a balanced sound signature with thumpy, well-textured low end, clean vocals, and airy treble. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the impact, the note wave from the new planar that they are using. The low end sounds more like a DD, and timbre wise the Aether doesn't have that light and floaty note wave to the sound like a lot of planars. It's not sizzly, it's more grounded, and the bass is punchy but also quick. Vocal wise everything sounds correct, they don't sound sharp or peaky, not too forward, not too recessed, and there's enough extension to the notes with the overall mid-range being very clean and very well layered. There's no bleeding into the mids. Now when it comes to the upper mids and the treble, the Aether isn't sharp or over boosted, it's very well extended, it's got great clarity and micro details without being fatiguing, but it does have that extra bit of sizzle and energy that makes it slightly brighter leaning. And scaling wise, the Aether is mostly in mid volume set at around 65 dBs or so, but it does scale pretty decently well depending on the track. For example, when it comes to K-pop, J-pop, Euroshika, Luna, and certain rock and metal tracks with lots of energy and cymbals, I found myself adjusting the volume back to mid volume and lower because the extra boost in the treble it's gonna get a bit too hot. However, on other genres like alt pop, hip hop, R&B, indie, slower instrumentals, and ballads, the Aether actually scales pretty decently well on songs like Birds of a Feather, Billie Eilish, Self Control, Frank Ocean, The Weeknd, and Kendrick stuff. Now compared to the silver nozzle on the Timeless 2, which is the smoothest and most natural planar that I have heard so far, the Aether is not quite at that level, but it's right behind it when it comes to timbre and not too much planar sizzliness. It's ever slightly sizzle without too much of the peakiness and brightness like the Wuzetian Legend. It does have more treble detail than the Timeless 2, and just overall a better sense of performance. Then versus SimGot's ET142, you're gonna get more detail with the blue nozzles on the SimGots, but overall the Aether is better balanced and less dynamic, but still very technical at the same time. Versus the warmer red nozzles, the Aether is cleaner, it's more extended in the vocals, has a little bit more air. And then versus the black nozzles, it's overall less energetic, it's smoother, but not quite as smooth as the Timeless 2. So it kind of sits in between the ET142 and Timeless 2 in terms of the dynamic contrast. Now value wise, I think these are pretty good at 170 USD. They punch above the price in terms of technical performance, and again, very good planar bass, doesn't sound like a planar when it comes to the low end, and it does undercut a lot of stuff like the Performer 5+2, which share a similar sound, but it's more expensive, not as well tuned in my opinion, with brighter planar treble, and overall just less textured and less impactful in the low end. And speaking of low end, the bass quantity and texture of the Aether sits in between the Hype 4T Pros and the Nova and Supermix 4 5+2. It's above the Supermix 4 5+2 Novas, but not quite as good as the Hype 4s and T Pros. So if you found the Hype 4s, T Pros a bit too much bass, but you found the Supermix 4, the Nova 5+2 to have not enough bass, then these kind of slide in the middle and have a good balance of both. But overall the Aether is a well balanced set. It's clean, but also you have the texture and impact, the punchiness from the bass, and the detail and technical performance on top without being too sizzly. So yeah, I would recommend these. And after the Aether, we have its younger brother, the Airoso, a 1+4 hybrid, and this has a slightly warm leading sound that's pretty smooth for the most part, but you get a good decent amount of air and contrast to the treble as well. The best example of this would be to compare it to the EM6L and the Meyer SLA3, where it's warmer and more contrasty than the EM6L. It's not going to be as smooth and airy and well separated, but overall I guess it's quote unquote more musical in a sense because it does have that extra body and extra contrast to the sound. And versus the SLA3, it's going to be warmer, it's going to be smoother, less peaky, and not as contrasty like the Bart Simpson upper mids on the SLA3. So the Airoso kind of sits in between those two in terms of just dynamics. It's got solid treble extension and a mixture of both, taking the dynamic aspect from the SLA3 and then adding in a bit of warmth and smoothness from the EM6L. Now vocal wise, the Airoso is going to be warmer, slightly thicker and huskier than usual, but it's not congested. You still get a good sense of air to the extension to the treble. It's not lacking in power or extension either. It's just a well done coloration in my opinion. And when it comes to the technical performance, performance, both the SLA3 and the EM6L are going to be slightly more detailed, as well as others like the Nova and the Supermix 4. But the Airoso is still competitive at its price. It's just not a value pick when it comes to pure performance. So if you want something more neutral and Harman, better bang for your buck, then the Nova and the Supermix 4 on sale would still be my recommendation. But the Airoso is a case where the tuning stands out more than the performance, with its warmer leaning and still dynamic and extended sound. Genre-wise, the Airoso works well for many tracks, from pop to hip-hop to ballads to instrumentals. These fit well as an all-rounder set that is slightly warm leaning, but with good extension on top. And scaling wise, these scale pretty good depending on the song, similar to the Aether. I don't really recommend blasting your brains out of these, since the Aether 10K peak is gonna catch you off guard on some more energetic tracks. However, it's also well balanced for the vast majority of tracks without being fatiguing, so you can crank these up a little bit, but not too much. When it comes to scaling, the Explorer is still gonna be the king at $100. You can crank those a lot more, or the Odysseys at $200, which is a cleaner and more technical version of the Explorer. So scaling wise, those two would be like the better options. Now versus the Aether, in terms of resolution and technical performance, it's going to be a step up over the Airosos, and sound wise, the Aether is going to be cleaner, it's going to be better balanced, less coloration, and just more technical in general. These actually remind me of a slightly better version of the EW300 with more natural timbre. Instead of the PZTs for the treble, you get BAs, and also a little more air and micro details. So if you're thinking of upgrading from something like the Clean and the Delcy, then the Airoso would be a decent upgrade to those. It's a slightly better version of the EW300 tech-wise, although not nearly as good in terms of value, because EW300 is like almost 50% less. It's not gonna be the king of value, but it's pretty enjoyable set, very engaging, pretty musical, and yeah, I recommend it. Moving on, we got our first headphones from Kiwiears, the ELLIPSE, and these are going right up in top tier. If you don't mind the form factor of a headphone and not being able to use these in public because they are open back, then the ELLIPSE is one of the best, headphone or IEMs period that you can buy for $100. The overall sound on the ELLIPSE is full, it's natural, it's got a punchy but textured low end, pretty well balanced overall when it comes to the mids, and with a slight emphasis when it comes to the treble for that extra little bit of shimmer in the cymbals. The mid bass on these have an authoritative attack to the notes with a pretty satisfying slam. I think quality wise, the Airoso and Aether may have a little bit more rumble when it comes to sub bass, but the impact in the drums feels more natural, like I can almost picture the drivers on these pulling back and forth when it hits my ears. The bigger 50mm DD definitely makes a noticeable difference when it comes to the note impact, but it's still very well controlled and doesn't bleed into the mids. The ELLIPSE is full sounding, but it's not warm necessarily because the bass shelf is linear and it doesn't tilt towards the low end with like a sub bass boost or something like that. It's overall just well balanced but full sounding. Vocal wise, the ELLIPSE is natural, it extends enough, it's well distanced, it's not too forward, not too recessed. Overall, it's just well balanced when it comes to the vocals as well, not wonky, not congested, no harsh peak or thinness either. The only real nitpick I have for these is that the treble doesn't scale as well as something like the Explorer, and it can get a bit much at higher volumes, but for the amount of air and extension you get, these scale surprisingly good from mid to mid-high volume. They're not as smooth as the EM6L or the Supernova, but it's got a good amount of macro details to the cymbals for the price, and it does have a slight contrast when it comes to cymbal crashes, which gives you that little extra bit of shimmer as it does slightly emphasize the later treble region. Fit wise, these are not too tight, not too heavy either. It's not peak comfort, I would say, but it does the job. It's pretty comfy overall, and I can use these for like a few hours without breaking sweat or hurting my ears, and they're also pretty easy to drive, and for $100, yeah, top tier. Now when it comes to the ATHEIA and the ARDOR, I do have mixed feeling on these two. The ATHEIA is very technical, it has great detail retrieval and very texture when it comes to the sub bass. However, the treble does get a bit too much. When I was listening to Model at around 75-80 dBs or so, and the chorus came on, these completely destroyed my ears. It reminds me of the Woozy Tian Legend, but with better sub bass. It's bright, it's energetic, it has planar timbre past low volume. It's pretty obvious once you crank it up. Like the hybrid configuration they're using is not very cohesive. It's not as smooth and natural like the Timeless 2. It does feel sharp and bright on a lot of songs with cymbals or energetic elements, especially when it comes to vocals. There's definitely a peak somewhere in the 3K region. The vocals also doesn't sound fully extended. It's almost as if they cut like a part of the upper mids after the 3K, and it also sounds a bit thin as well, maybe like a scoop in the mid bass as well, and it does feel over boosted in the treble. Well, graph checks out. These also don't scale very well because of the treble boost. It does feel like it's tilted towards the upper mids and treble more, so please do not crank these. However, it's not all bad because the ATHEIA has actually pretty great sub bass texture when it comes to the rumble, the extension, and how bouncy and deep it goes. And it actually does hip hop tracks like Hulu, Hey Now pretty well, and I would recommend these when it comes to hip hop, rap at mid volume. These also bring a nice dynamic contrast when it comes to slower tracks with not a lot of energetic elements like acoustic, ballads, indie, instrumental, stuff like that. But when it comes to pop, J-pop, K-pop, certain rock and metal tracks, I would not really recommend these for those. Overall though, I would give the ATHEIA a maybe depending on the genre. Again, it's very technical and great when it comes to hip hop, but for over $300, maybe. Similarly, the ARDOR is also a brighter leaning set with energetic treble like the ATHEIA, but it just has a little bit more mid bass, less detail, and now with ANC. Feature wise, the noise cancelling actually works pretty well for $100. Obviously, it's not gonna beat the $300, $500 Sony's, Bose, AirPod Max, but for the price, very solid. I almost got hit by a car because I couldn't hear it, so yeah, it works. And when it comes to scaling, the ARDOR is a low to mid volume set like the ATHEIA that does work better with genres that have less cymbals, less electronic elements, because on songs like Butterfly, Model, it just sounds way too sizzly and energetic on these. Do not crank these up. The vocals also sound a bit recessed. It doesn't sound scooped per se, but it doesn't sound like powerful, fully extended, slightly sizzly in the extension in the air as well, but just not as sharp this time versus the more technical sounding ATHEIA. Overall, this is a maybe as well depending on your use case. For example, if you listen at lower volumes and you just need some music on the background while working, studying, or commuting, then the ARDOR is pretty worth it at $100 because the ANC does work pretty well. And comfort wise, these are pretty comfy, the pads are soft, it's light, and they do look pretty simple and low-key as well. But outside of that context and outside of genres like hip-hop, R&B, and slower tracks at mid to lower volumes, you can't really turn these up too much and you can't really immerse yourself in the music because the treble does get a little bit too energetic. So I'll give these a maybe because there is a actually better version of these as well. This is the AVENTUS, also a truly wireless ANC set from Kiwiears. Comfort and look wise, these are not going to be as light and soft as the ARDOR. They also look evidently more, gamer-ish, but they are tuned better in my opinion. The overall sound is bassy but well balanced. It's not overly bright, it's not thin, and doesn't sound recessed in the vocals. And the ANC on these actually sound better than the ARDOR because this does have better sound isolation. The cups are bigger, it wraps around your ears more, the isolation is better, as well as the tighter fit also helps with making the ANC better. Tech wise, these are not going to be as detailed as the ARDOR or the ATHEIA, but it is way easier on your ears, like sound wise. You're not going to get the fatigue from the other sets. You can crank these a lot more. They're also cheaper and with better noise isolation as well, playing back most genres with no issues. So if you don't mind a slightly heavier and less comfy fit, not as sleek looking as the ARDOR, then these are better balanced and I would take these over the ARDOR personally. But if you don't mind turning down the volume, you want like a more comfy, a more like a lighter kind of like fit, then the ARDOR would be better in that sense. All in all, for $75, I would recommend these. Then lastly, we have the Division, which is a borderline bass headset depending on how much bass you are used to. Now there is coloring into the mids. Again, it's very bassy. The vocals aren't fully extended, not fully open, they're not that clear, but the treble is still prominent enough without being energetic like the ARDOR or the ATHEIA, which gives the Division just enough balance, does not sound congested, and it gives it that like bassy V-shaped sound. Basically, the Division is a less balanced and bassier version of the AVENTUS without ANC and not as technical. These are the worst out of the lineup when it comes to technicalities. All the other ones are going to be much better when it comes to resolution and detail. Now alone wise, the texture isn't going to be crazy because it does get a bit boomy due to the sheer amount of bass you get. So don't come in expecting to be wowed by the separation, the texture, or the resolution. For example, when you compare this to the ELLIPSE or the ATHEIA in terms of the, the low end texture, those are going to be much better than this. But if you want something bassy and fun that doesn't bury the treble and the cymbals, then the Division would be a good pick. You're going to have a good time with these. The design is simple, it's low profile, it's decently light. The comfort is okay, it's a bit tight on the pads could be softer as well. But overall, for $50, go for it, why not? I wouldn't give this a full recommendation because it is more niche, it's more like a bass head kind of V-shaped sound. But if this fits your library, if you have a lot of hip-hop, R&B, rock, then this would be a good recommendation. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope this review was helpful. Kiwiears, if you're watching this, please fix the treble on the ATHEIA and the ARDOR. But aside from that, overall a very good start. 3 out of 5 on the headphones, especially with the ELLIPSE. And overall the build quality on all the headphones are pretty decent as well, pretty solid, and great IEM releases as well. Anyways, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see everyone in the next one.
Shout out to Rark's Cat, Dom Q, Disco Scotus, B, Urak, Mystic Spoon, Attack, Walker Standard, User, Patrick, Polly J, Mr. Gorillas, Anton Risto, Gis Seng Yun, Christopher Jackson, Name, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, 777ZK, Ben Thompson, Obi, Wizard, Frickalicious, Andrick, Ricardo, Tapas, Oh Really, Contain Guava Juice Gains, Shrimp Buckley, Forever New, Triple Well Extended, and Chuck Norris. Thank you guys so much.